A silent language is carved into the stone of every ancient city wall. These structures are not just barriers, they are complex defensive blueprints, concealing brilliant strategies in their very architecture. By the end of this journey, you will be able to look at any historic wall and read its hidden story of survival. We will uncover why a straight wall was a fatal flaw and how some cities used false gates as deadly traps. What forgotten secret do you think these stones are waiting to tell? That flickering firelight against the dark wilderness reveals a deeper truth. The first walls were as much about the mind as they were about stone and timber. They created a psychological sanctuary, a line drawn in the earth that said, "Here we are safe. Here community begins." As the historian Lewis Mumford observed, the city was first and foremost designed for protection. Early human settlements existed in a state of constant vulnerability. The wall was the physical manifestation of a shared agreement, a collective promise to defend one another. It carved out a space of order from the chaos, creating a world where people could sleep without one eye open. This fundamental sense of security was the catalyst for everything that followed. Inside that protective embrace, people could finally stop merely surviving and start truly living. They could specialize in crafts, develop laws, record knowledge, and create art. The wall was the ultimate declaration of permanence, a statement that this group was here to stay. It fostered a powerful sense of identity, a clear us within, distinct from the unknown them outside. This primal need for security ignited an architectural arms race that would span millennia. Why did a simple barrier become the very cornerstone of civilization? Because it provided the stable ground upon which the entire, magnificent structure of human culture could be built. The desperate need to feel safe set the stage for some of the most brilliant and deceptive designs ever conceived by human hands. That unspoken message of power was a deliberate architectural strategy. Before a single soldier scaled a ladder or a battering ram touched the gate, the battle for the city was often fought in the mind. An invading army cresting a hill would be met not just by a wall, but by a seemingly impassable curtain of stone, its scale meticulously designed to diminish their spirit. This was the first and most potent layer of defense, psychological warfare written in Masonry. The great walls of cities like Constantinople were not merely tall, they were monumental declarations of power. Their sheer, soaring presence was intended to crush the morale of a besieging force, to make the very idea of attack feel futile. The visual impact communicated a clear, unspoken message. It said that the people inside possessed immense resources, vast manpower, and an unbreakable determination to protect their home. This psychological gambit was a brilliant, calculated defense. Why waste arrows and lives if the sight of your walls could convince an enemy to simply turn around? How much of a wall's legendary strength was, in fact, a masterful illusion, a colossal bluff carved from stone? The architects understood that the most effective victory was the one that never required physical combat. They fortified the mind of the enemy first, making intimidation a primary weapon. Yet for this grand illusion to hold, it had to be backed by formidable physical reality. That colossal bluff of power had to be backed by ruthless practicality. The second principle of defensive architecture turned the very ground outside the walls into a weapon. This was the geometry of death, a chillingly precise science of angles and killing zones. Instead of a straight, flat approach to a city gate, attackers would find themselves forced into a narrow, winding path. In this confined space, their numbers became a liability. Their large shields, designed for frontal assaults, were suddenly useless against arrows and stones raining down from above and from the sides simultaneously. The architecture funneled them like cattle into a slaughterhouse. The true genius of this design was the Bastion. These were sturdy, angular projections that jutted out from the main curtain wall. Think of them as the castle's permanent sentinels. A soldier standing on a bastion had a clear line of sight along the face of the wall itself. This eliminated the deadly blind spots where attackers could gather safely to set ladders or mine the foundations. Any enemy soldier attempting to scale a wall would now be exposed to enfilading fire, a deadly crossfire from multiple bastions at once. The straight wall was indeed a fatal flaw for this very reason. It created sheltered areas, safe havens for an attacking force to operate without threat. The brilliance of the angled bastion was that it eliminated every single safe haven. The wall was no longer a passive barrier. It became an active, multi-directional weapon system. The stone itself became an extension of the defending army, a permanent soldier that never slept, never tired, and held its position forever. This lethal geometry forced attackers to pay for every inch of ground with blood, long before they ever reached the main gate. It was a masterful and terrifying application of form following a brutal function. But what if the walls themselves could tell even more elaborate lies? What if the most obvious way in was, in fact, the most carefully designed trap of all? The Theodosian walls of Constantinople stand as the ultimate testament to layered defense. Imagine not one, but two massive walls standing side by side, separated by a broad, open terrace known as the Peribolos. An attacker who managed to scale the first outer wall would not find victory but a nightmare. They would drop down into this killing zone, completely exposed to a storm of arrows and javelins from the taller, far more formidable inner wall looming above them. This space between the walls was not a pathway, it was a carefully designed slaughterhouse. Beyond this formidable double barrier lay a wide, water-filled moat. This was not a simple ditch. It was a deep, watery trench that rendered two of the most powerful siege weapons useless. Siege towers, those rolling fortresses designed to bridge a wall, could not cross it. And sappers, soldiers who tried to tunnel underneath to collapse the foundations, found their efforts flooded and thwarted. This was defense in depth perfected. Each layer, the moat, the outer wall, the killing zone, and the inner wall, was a self-contained obstacle. The brilliant redundancy meant that breaching one layer did not mean breaching them all. An enemy could pour immense resources into overcoming the moat and the outer wall, only to find themselves trapped and annihilated before the final, strongest barrier. This is why these legendary walls protected the great city for nearly 1,000 years, withstanding over a dozen major sieges. Their strength was not in a single, unbreakable line, but in a sequence of escalating challenges that broke the will and the manpower of any invading army. This philosophy of layered, redundant defense echoes across the world and throughout history. From the island fortresses of Japan to the Crusader castles of the Middle East, the same principle holds true. The most enduring fortifications are never a single shield, but a series of them, each one ready to catch the blow if the one before it fails. Rising from the French countryside like a vision from a storybook, the fortress of Carcassonne is a lesson in defensive perfection. Its seemingly singular, majestic form is an architectural lie, a masterpiece of concentric defense where two complete rings of walls, punctuated by 53 individual towers, create a seamless killing machine. An attacker facing these walls would not confront a single obstacle, but a sequence of lethal puzzles. The outer wall was intentionally built lower than the inner one. This was not a design flaw, but a stroke of genius. Defenders positioned on the high inner ramparts could fire their arrows and catapults directly over the heads of their own comrades stationed on the outer wall. This created a devastating, two-tiered barrage that could rain down on an enemy without ever endangering a fellow soldier. The gates were not simple openings, but complex death traps in their own right. Each was protected by a barbican, a fortified outwork that jutted forward, forcing any approaching force into a narrow, twisting path. In this confined, exposed space, their numerical advantage vanished, and they were funneled into a perfect kill zone. The entire philosophy of Carcassonne was one of controlled attrition. Every tower provided an overlapping field of fire with its neighbors, ensuring no blind spots. Every wall supported another. An army had to fight not just through one line of defense, but through a series of them, each more difficult and deadly than the last. The attacking force would be systematically bled dry, its morale and numbers shattered long before it ever glimpsed the city's heart. What makes this 700-year-old design so profoundly effective, even by modern military analysis? Its strength is not in any single superhuman element, but in the flawless harmony of all its parts. Every stone, every tower, every killing zone works in concert with the others, creating an integrated defensive network that is far greater than the sum of its parts. This European symphony of stone finds a powerful and elegant echo in the defensive philosophies of the East, where a different culture devised its own ingenious answer to the age-old problem of the wall. The defensive symphony of Carcassonne finds its ultimate expression on a continental scale with the Great Wall of China. We often picture it as a single, unbroken ribbon of stone, but this is a grand illusion. The truth is far more brilliant. It was not one wall, but a sprawling network of ramparts, watchtowers, and fortified garrison towns woven across the landscape. Its genius lay not in being an impenetrable physical barrier, which would be impossible to maintain for thousands of miles, but in its function as a sophisticated control system. The primary goal was never to stop a nomadic army in its tracks, but to manage its movement, slow its advance, and rob it of its greatest asset, surprise. High on mountain peaks and ridges, a chain of beacon towers stood sentinel. At the first sign of movement, a signal would ignite, a single plume of smoke by day or a fiery beacon by night. This message could leap from tower to tower, traveling faster than any horseman, alerting command centers hundreds of miles away that a threat was approaching. This early warning system was the true heart of the wall, mobilizing imperial troops and directing them to the precise point of danger long before the enemy ever arrived. The wall itself served as an elevated highway, allowing those mobilized soldiers and vital supplies to move rapidly along the frontier, reinforcing threatened sectors with an efficiency that would have been impossible across open ground. Its sinuous path, snaking over impossible mountains and plunging into deep valleys, was a masterclass in adaptive design, using the natural terrain to maximize its defensive potential. How could such a colossal structure possibly be manned effectively? The secret was decentralization. While the emperor commanded from a distant capital, local generals held authority over their specific wall segments. They managed the garrison troops, maintained the beacon towers, and could respond to immediate threats without waiting for orders that might take weeks to arrive. This system of localized command transformed a massive, seemingly static monument into a responsive, intelligent, and living border mechanism. The Great Wall was not a silent, solitary sentinel. It was a web of communication, a network of movement, and a system of control, speaking a complex language of smoke, fire, and swift movement that defended an empire not with a single fist, but with 1,000 watchful eyes. Run your hand over the cold, rough granite of a Scottish castle. Then picture the sun-warmed, impossibly smooth ashlar blocks of an Inca fortress. You are not just touching stone, you are reading a civilization's first line of defense, written in the language of materials. The choice of what to build with was never arbitrary. It was a profound strategic decision dictated by the land itself and the enemies at the gate. In the Scottish Highlands, granite was abundant and brutally hard, ideal for resisting the relentless battering rams and siege engines of medieval warfare. Its rough, unhewn face was not a sign of primitive work, but a testament to its sheer, defiant strength. Across the ocean, the Inca had no such siege engines to fear. Their primary threat was the earth itself, the violent tremors of the Andes. Their solution was not mortar, but a masterpiece of geometry. Each stone was painstakingly shaped to interlock with its neighbors with such precision that a knife blade could not slip between them. This created a wall that could sway and settle during an earthquake without collapsing, a defensive system that moved with the land it was built upon. Why choose one material over another? The answer is always a story of brilliant pragmatism. In Mesopotamia, where stone was scarce, they fired the very earth beneath their feet into strong, durable mud bricks. In China, laborers would tirelessly pound layers of earth, gravel, and clay into a wooden frame, creating a material called rammed earth. When compacted, this mixture becomes astonishingly hard and resilient, capable of absorbing the impact of cannonballs that would shatter harder stone. These walls were not weak compromises, they were intelligent adaptations. A rubble-filled wall, for instance, might seem less sophisticated than solid stone. But when a heavy projectile slammed into it, the rubble core would absorb and dissipate the energy, like a punch landing on a sandbag instead of a rigid plate. The wall might be scarred, but it would not crumble. This reveals a deeper truth about defensive architecture. Genius is not always about finding the strongest possible material. It is about understanding the properties of what you have and using it in the smartest possible way. It is about listening to the land and answering its challenges with ingenuity. The silent, enduring story told by stone, brick, and earth leads us directly to the active elements, the clever tricks and deadly features that gave these walls their voice. Look up at those towers. They were the nerve centers of the entire defense, the silent sentinels that watched over every inch of the killing ground. While the curtain wall formed the shield, the towers were the spear. Their height was a decisive advantage, transforming a defender's arrow from a short-range weapon into a plunging shot that could strike with terrifying force from a much greater distance. This elevation also meant they could see everything, spotting troop movements and directing the defense like a general on a colossal chessboard. But their role went far beyond observation. Each tower was a fortress in its own right, a self-contained stronghold designed for a grim and final purpose. If an enemy swarm ever managed to overwhelm a section of the main wall, breaching the primary line, the fight was not over. The towers on either side of the breach would not surrender. Their doors would be barred, and they would become unyielding islands of resistance. From these stone citadels, defenders could pour fire down onto the invaders now trapped in the gap, effectively counter-attacking from a position of immense strength. This turned a potential catastrophe into a contained battle, a deadly pocket where the attacker's momentary victory could be swiftly reversed. The evolution of these towers tells a story of constant adaptation. For centuries, round towers dominated the skyline. Their curved surfaces were excellent at deflecting stones from catapults and trebuchets. But then, gunpowder changed everything. The massive, concentrated impact of a cannonball could shatter rounded stone, causing catastrophic collapses. The answer was a geometric revolution, the angular bastion. This new shape was not just stronger, it was smarter. Its flat, sloping sides were far more resistant to cannon fire, able to deflect or absorb the blow without crumbling. More importantly, its sharp angles eliminated the blind spots that round towers could not. From the point of a bastion, defenders had a clear line of sight directly along the base of their own walls. They could fire in 2, even 3 directions, creating that deadly enfilading crossfire that swept the entire approach clean. A simple change in shape, from a gentle curve to a sharp angle, fundamentally rewrote the rules of siege warfare. These projecting elements, whether old round towers or new angular bastions, were the critical nodes in the defensive network, but they were only one part of the equation. Their power was meaningless if the gates, the most vulnerable points in any wall, were not protected by an even deeper layer of cunning deception. That intense focus on the gate reveals a fundamental tension, the eternal conflict between the need for access and the demand for absolute security. It was the one place a wall had to be open, and therefore it had to be the most brilliantly deceptive. An attacker staring down a long, straight road to a simple gate saw an obvious target. But an attacker facing a true medieval gatehouse saw a nightmare. The approach itself was the first layer of the trap. Instead of a clear path, they would find a narrow, winding corridor, often twisting between towering outer walls. This cramped space made it impossible to swing a heavy battering ram with any real force, robbing the attackers of their primary tool. Even more cunningly, many gates forced entrants to make a sharp turn to the right just before the main doors. Why the right? Because most soldiers carried their shield in their left hand. This single, simple turn exposed their vulnerable, unshielded side directly to the defenders waiting inside. It was a psychological masterstroke, a final, disorienting twist before the real horror began. Once inside that dark, stone throat of the gatehouse, the assault entered its final, brutal phase. From slots in the ceiling, known chillingly as murder holes, a rain of death would fall. Rocks, heavy bolts, quicklime, and even boiling water or hot sand would pour down on the trapped, panicked soldiers below. There was no escape, no room to raise a shield effectively, and just as they recovered from that onslaught, a second, gridded iron portcullis would slam down behind them, cutting off their retreat and trapping them in a stone cage. They were now caught between 2 iron barriers, with death raining from above, completely at the mercy of the defenders. This entire convoluted, deadly design served one core purpose: to break the most valuable asset in any attack: momentum. It transformed a coordinated charge into a confused, piecemeal, and utterly vulnerable trickle. Every twist in the path, every heavy door, every hidden hole was a deliberate delay, buying precious seconds for the defenders to organize, to aim, and to kill. The gatehouse was not a door, it was a meticulously engineered digestive system for an army, designed to chew up and spit out any force foolish enough to enter. And if these architectural deceptions above ground were not enough, the defenders had one more deeply unsettling trick hidden beneath the earth: a silent, invisible war fought in the dark. That battle for the gate was only half the story, for the real danger often came from below. While armies clashed above, a secret, claustrophobic war was waged in absolute darkness beneath their feet. Attackers would not just assault the walls, they would try to literally pull them down from under the ground. This was the art of mining, a terrifyingly effective tactic where soldiers, often called sappers, would dig a narrow tunnel directly towards a wall's foundation. The goal was simple and devastating: to hollow out a large chamber beneath the stones, support it temporarily with wooden beams, and then set it all on fire. As the wooden supports turned to ash, the foundation would collapse, bringing a massive section of the wall crashing down in a cloud of dust and rubble. creating a brutal, man-made avalanche for the attackers to storm through. It was a silent, invisible threat that could undo years of architectural planning in a single, thundering moment. But the defenders were not passive victims in this subterranean game. They became underground hunters, masters of listening to the earth itself, in specially designed chambers built right into the foundations or beneath the moat, known as listening galleries. Men would sit in the profound silence, their ears pressed against the cold stone or against the ends of drums placed on the ground. They were listening for the faintest scratch, the rhythmic tap of a pickaxe, the muffled sound of shoveling. The very stone of the wall became a giant sounding board, transmitting the vibrations of the enemy's work. How could they possibly pinpoint the direction of a sound through solid earth? They used brilliantly simple tools. A bowl of water placed on the ground would ripple with the faintest tremor. By observing the direction of the ripples, or by using multiple listeners in different galleries to triangulate the sound, they could map the enemy's progress with shocking accuracy. Once they knew the path of the attacking mine, they would dig their own tunnel, a countermine, to intercept it. The moment the two tunnels broke through into each other was one of pure, primal horror. It was not a battle of armies, but a desperate, close-quarters brawl in a pitch-black, airless space barely wide enough for one man to stand. Soldiers fought with knives, short swords, and clubs in the oppressive darkness, the only light coming from the flicker of a torch, the air thick with dust and the smell of damp earth and fear. These were not glorious cavalry charges. They were brutal, suffocating struggles for survival fought by men who could often only sense their enemy by sound and touch. This hidden dimension of siege warfare reveals a profound truth about defense. It was a full-spectrum endeavor that engaged every sense and element. The earth was not just something to build upon. It was a medium to be listened to, a weapon to be wielded, and a battlefield in its own right. The stones above could tell a story of power and geometry, but the silent earth below held the echoes of a far more intimate and terrifying conflict, a reminder that a city's fate could be decided not by towering walls, but by the faintest vibration in a bowl of water. The most brilliant defensive designs were often deliberate lies. A seemingly crumbling, poorly maintained section of wall could be the deadliest trap of all. This was the illusion of weakness, a masterful psychological ploy where architects would design a convincing but ultimately solid false gate or a deliberately vulnerable-looking bastion. Its sole purpose was to lure an attacking commander into a fatal mistake. Why would a defender ever want a part of their wall to appear weak? Because controlling where the enemy attacks is more than half the battle won. By presenting a tempting but treacherous target, the defenders could dictate the entire terms of the engagement, funneling the enemy's greatest strength directly into their own pre-prepared killing zone. This area would look like the easiest point of entry, but it was always covered by hidden archer positions, camouflaged firing slits, and carefully ranged artillery. The enemy would mass for their grand assault, believing they had found the chink in the city's armor, only to discover they had charged headlong into a meat grinder. Even the very tops of the walls could conceal a deadly surprise. Those ornate stone projections jutting out from the battlements, known as machicolations, looked from a distance like standard decorative parapets. But their true function was revealed only when an attacker reached the base of the wall. The floors of these projections were pierced with holes, allowing defenders to drop rocks, pour boiling liquids, or shoot arrows straight down onto the enemy below, all while remaining in complete safety. The enemy, thinking they had found shelter tight against the wall, were in fact standing in the most exposed position possible. This strategic use of illusion demonstrates that the language of walls was not always honest. It was a vocabulary of deceit where a perceived flaw was a carefully baited hook, and a beautiful architectural feature was a concealed weapon. The stone could whisper a promise of easy victory, all the while guiding an enemy force to its annihilation. These tactical deceptions on the wall itself were just one piece of a much larger puzzle, a grand strategic vision that began long before the first stone was ever laid. The silent war beneath the gates was ultimately a battle over the integrity of the ground itself, a truth that leads our eyes upward to the grandest scale of all. The ancient city of Machu Picchu seems to grow organically from the mountaintop, its terraces and walls blending so seamlessly with the cliffs they appear to be a natural extension of the stone. This is the ultimate expression of a fundamental principle. Defensive architecture did not exist in a vacuum. It was a constant, brilliant dialogue with the surrounding geography. Building on high ground was the most obvious strategic choice, providing a commanding view for miles and forcing any attacker to fight gravity itself, arriving exhausted and exposed after a grueling climb. But the true genius of a location was not always about being the highest peak. It was about how the land could be manipulated to become an active partner in the defense. A fast-flowing river was not just a source of water, it was a ready-made, flowing moat that could isolate a fortress on three sides. A treacherous marsh was not useless land, it was a natural barrier that could swallow an army whole, negating their cavalry and siege engines. The most formidable walls were often the shortest, built not on open plains but across narrow mountain passes or along razor-thin ridges. In these locations, a single, well-placed wall could block an entire invasion route, a strategic choke point where a few hundred defenders could hold off thousands. The wall itself was just the final, man-made lock on a door that nature had already built. So how did a seemingly poor location become an unconquerable stronghold? The answer lies in turning every natural feature into a weapon. A forest was not cleared, it was left as a tangled, confusing approach that broke up formations. A steep, rocky scree slope was not terraced for farming. It was left unstable so that any advancing soldier would send cascades of loose stone tumbling down, alerting the defenders and breaking ankles. The builders were not just masons, they were master observers of the land. They understood water flow, soil stability, and the paths of the wind. Their skill was not merely in piling stone upon stone, but in reading the landscape like a military map and augmenting its inherent strengths with mathematical precision. This harmonious relationship between human intention and the natural world created defenses that were not just strong, but intelligent, systems where the mountain and the wall fought side by side as one. This deep integration of landscape and architecture forces us to reconsider the very purpose of these structures. Were they merely shields, or did they serve a more profound, almost spiritual role in the civilizations they protected? The architect's most crucial tool was no longer the chisel but the compass. In an age of cannons and gunpowder, the science of survival was written in angles and lines. A master designer would stand before a vast parchment, calculating not just the height of a wall, but the precise arc of a cannonball's flight, ensuring that every single inch of ground before his fortress was swept by direct, unimpeded fire. This principle is known as defilade, a geometric doctrine that declared there would be no safe haven, no blind spot, no shelter from view. It was a chillingly elegant application of mathematics to the problem of killing. The solution to this deadly equation was the Star Fort, a revolutionary design whose complex, jagged outline looks more like a snowflake than a castle. Those protruding points are not decorative. Each one is a calculated, angular bastion, positioned so that it can protect its neighboring bastion with a clear line of fire along the wall. An enemy soldier attempting to approach any section of the fortress would find themselves exposed to a devastating crossfire from at least 2 different directions simultaneously. Why did geometry become the language of war? Because a straight wall was a death sentence against cannon fire. A flat surface presented a perfect, unyielding target for a heavy ball, which would shatter the stone into deadly shrapnel. But the angled walls of a star fort were designed to deflect. A cannonball would strike a sloping surface at a shallow angle. Its energy dissipated as it glanced harmlessly away, or it would be absorbed by the thick, earthen ramparts that backed the stone. This was not just building stronger, it was building smarter. The entire fortress became a series of interlocking triangles and pentagons, a geometric puzzle where every internal angle was calculated to eliminate any defensive weakness. The result was a killing field of pure mathematics, a space where the very ground was calculated for maximum exposure. This mathematical arms race produced structures of startling beauty, their sharp, symmetrical patterns etched into the landscape. We can look upon them now as art, but their elegant lines were born from a single, ruthless calculation: how to use geometry to ensure that anyone approaching would be seen, targeted, and eliminated. The cold geometry of the Star Fort reveals an unexpected truth: that the science of survival could blossom into a profound art form. A fortress like Pomonova in Italy, when viewed from above, resembles a perfect, intricate snowflake carved into the earth. Its sharp, symmetrical bastions were not born from a desire for decoration, but from the brutal mathematics of defilade. Yet, in solving that lethal equation, the architects created something of startling beauty, a pattern so harmonious it feels almost celestial. This was a sublime fusion where brutal function and breathtaking form became one and the same. Those massive, sloping earthen ramparts, known as aggressors, served a deadly purpose, deflecting cannonballs and eliminating any cover for attackers. But they also created a clean, sweeping visual line, an elegant profile that made the fortress appear both impregnable and strangely graceful. This marriage of might and beauty was a global phenomenon. Look at the elegant, curved stone bases of Japanese castles. Their beautiful, upward sweeping walls, called musha were masterpieces of stonework designed to make scaling them nearly impossible. The layered, pagoda-style roofs, while stunning to behold, were not merely for show. Their complex angles and non-flammable materials made them resistant to fire arrows and incredibly difficult for an enemy to navigate. The pursuit of security did not preclude the pursuit of beauty. In fact, the demands of defense often gave rise to it. The sheer grandeur of a fortress was itself a powerful statement. It communicated not just military might, but immense wealth, cultural sophistication, and an unshakable permanence. It declared that this civilization was not merely surviving, but flourishing, capable of investing vast resources into creating something both powerful and magnificent. So, can a structure designed for war be considered a work of art? The great fortified cities of the world answer with a resounding yes. They stand as enduring proof that the human drive to create beauty is irrepressible, persisting even in our most pragmatic and defensive endeavors. This aesthetic of power transformed mere instruments of war into cultural icons, their silhouettes forever etched into our historical memory. Yet, the ultimate test of this martial art was never its appearance on a quiet day, but its performance under the terrifying duress of a full-scale siege. A wall's true character was only revealed when the first boulder crashed against its stones. The grand theories of angles and psychology were meaningless until put to the ultimate test, a full-scale siege. This was a brutal, high-stakes chess match where every defensive feature we have explored had a very specific and deadly purpose. The great height of a wall was not for grandeur, but to render enemy ladders perilously short and unstable, making the final, exposed climb a death sentence. That immense, reinforced gate was not just a barrier, it was a direct answer to the relentless, rhythmic thunder of the battering ram. And the moat, so often pictured as a simple watery ditch, was a multi-layered defense, its depth stopping siege towers and its water table flooding the tunnels of would-be miners. In this desperate dance, the defenders' intimate knowledge of their own fortress was their greatest weapon. They knew every blind spot, every perfect archery position, every echo in a listening gallery. This allowed them to anticipate the enemy's moves, to turn the architecture itself into a partner. A smaller garrison, vastly outnumbered, could use this knowledge to incredible effect. How could a few hundred hold a city against thousands? The wall acted as a force multiplier. It gave each defender the power of 10. A single archer on a high parapet, shielded by stone, could rain arrows down on hundreds of attackers struggling across open ground. A handful of soldiers manning a gatehouse could bottle up an entire enemy battalion in a deadly choke point. The structure did the heavy lifting, allowing human courage and strategy to be focused with devastating efficiency. This relentless pressure, the constant clash of attacker ingenuity against defender resolve, was the crucible that forged military architecture. A siege was a live fire experiment, and its results were carved into stone for the next generation. When a new type of catapult could throw heavier stones, walls grew thicker and sloped. When cannons emerged, the angular bastion was born. There was no room for stagnant design. The survival of a city depended on adapting faster than the enemy could innovate. The evolution of the fortress was not a gentle progression. It was a series of violent, necessary revolutions, each one a direct response to the shattered walls of the past. This cycle of attack and defense seems like an ancient story, but its core principles did not vanish with the age of castles. They simply shifted form, moving from the city walls to the digital frontier, where the same timeless struggle for security continues in a new, invisible landscape. That thunderous roar echoed the end of an era. The arrival of the cannon on the battlefield did not just introduce a new weapon, it fundamentally rewrote the grammar of defensive architecture. For centuries, the primary threat had come from men climbing ladders or swinging rams, threats that high, vertical stone walls were perfectly designed to counter. But a cannonball was a different kind of problem entirely. It was a massive, concentrated impact of pure horizontal force, delivered from a distance. The tall, majestic curtain walls that had defined the medieval skyline were suddenly catastrophic liabilities. Their relatively thin, flat faces presented a perfect target, and when struck, the stone did not just crack, it exploded into a cloud of lethal, high-velocity shrapnel. The very thing that was meant to protect the defenders now became their greatest danger. The immediate, brutal response was to abandon height in favor of sheer mass. Architects began designing walls that were significantly lower but exponentially thicker. These were often not solid stone, but massive earthen ramps faced with a skin of brick. Why earth? Because it could absorb the cannonball's kinetic energy like a punch landing on a sandbag. The earth would compress and dissipate the force, leaving a scar but preventing the structural collapse that shattered stone guaranteed. This was a complete inversion of defensive philosophy. The primary goal was no longer to prevent men from scaling the walls, but to survive a relentless, distant bombardment. This new reality also demanded a new shape. The proud, round towers that had once offered excellent deflection against stones from trebuchets were disastrous against cannon fire. Their curved surfaces could focus the impact of a cannonball, leading to massive chunks of masonry shearing off. The geometric answer was the angular bastion, the defining feature of the Trace Italian or Star Fort. These low, projecting pentagonal structures were designed with flat, sloping sides specifically to deflect cannonballs away from the fortress. More importantly, their sharp angles provided the overlapping fields of fire necessary to sweep the entire approach with defensive cannonade, turning the fortress itself into an artillery platform. So why did the classic castle, with its soaring keeps and tall towers, become utterly obsolete? Its verticality, once a symbol of dominance and safety, became a towering bullseye. It was a paradigm shift born of necessity, a stark reminder that the language of walls is a living dialect, constantly evolving in response to new threats. A defensive design that fails to adapt is not just outdated, it is a death trap. Yet, even as walls grew lower and thicker to withstand physical bombardment, their most enduring power often resided not in their stone, but in the stories they told and the shadows they cast upon the human heart. A wall's shadow stretched far beyond its physical footprint, casting a long, psychological silhouette over the land. While its stones were meant to stop armies, its true power often lay in the message it broadcast to the world. The very act of building a monumental wall was a breathtaking display of a ruler's authority. It declared with silent, immovable certainty that the state commanded vast resources, immense manpower, and the sophisticated organization to coordinate it all. This was not just a construction project, it was a permanent, unmissable advertisement of power. A traveler approaching a city like ancient Babylon would see its walls from miles away, a shimmering band of baked brick rising from the plain. That distant view was a carefully crafted piece of propaganda, telling a story of wealth, permanence, and unshakable resolve before a single word was spoken. For the people living within those walls, the structure fostered a powerful, shared identity. It physically defined the space of the community, creating a clear us within, protected from the chaotic them outside. This sense of shared destiny, of being part of something larger and more secure, was a potent tool for social cohesion. How did a wall function as a tool of propaganda? Its sheer scale and apparent invincibility were designed to deter aggression not just through strength, but through sheer spectacle. An enemy would look upon it and question the cost of an assault, not just in lives but in time and resources. It fostered a profound sense of pride and belonging among the citizens, who saw themselves reflected in the grandeur of their own defenses. This symbolic value was so powerful that some walls were maintained and expanded long after their immediate military need had passed. They became cultural icons, the very heart of a city's identity, their image stamped on coins and celebrated in song. Yet, this intoxicating sense of security could be a dangerous illusion. A population that believed its walls were truly impregnable might grow complacent, neglecting the need for strong armies, vigilant scouts, or shrewd diplomacy. The greatest walls in history did not fall solely because of superior siege engines, but sometimes because those inside had forgotten that stone alone cannot defend a city that has lost its will to fight. Even the mightiest walls possessed a fatal flaw, an inherent vulnerability written into their very nature. They were, after all, static and silent. History echoes with the downfall of legendary fortifications, not because their designs were flawed, but because the world around them refused to stand still. The immense walls of Babylon, celebrated across the ancient world, were ultimately undone not by a direct assault, but by a brilliant stroke of hydrological engineering. Cyrus the Great simply diverted the flow of the Euphrates River, allowing his soldiers to march through the riverbed and into the city under the cover of its own defenses. Centuries later, the famed Theodosian walls of Constantinople, which had repelled over a dozen major sieges across 1,000 years, finally met their match in a single, terrifying technological leap. the massive bronze cannon of the Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II. The stone, perfected against ancient threats, could not withstand this new, brutal physics of gunpowder and iron. This reveals a deeper, more insidious weakness. A monumental wall could breed a dangerous complacency within the society it protected. The population, feeling secure behind their imposing barrier, might neglect the maintenance of a strong field army or the delicate art of diplomacy. Why invest in scouts and envoys when you have a wall of stone? This fortress mentality could slowly strangle the city it was meant to save. By turning inward, a walled city could isolate itself from the vital flow of trade, new ideas, and potential alliances, the very lifeblood that sustained its culture and economy in the long run. The wall, designed to keep danger out, could end up caging its inhabitants in a state of stagnation. So, what is the ultimate weakness of any static defensive line? It can never be stronger than its most poorly guarded gate or the single, brilliant idea of its attackers. Once the battle begins, a wall cannot learn, it cannot move, and it cannot adapt. Its strategy is frozen in masonry, while the enemy is free to innovate. The repeated failure of even the most brilliant walls teaches a humbling lesson in strategic thinking. No single system, no matter how impressive, can ever provide absolute security. An over-reliance on one form of defense, be it a wall, a moat, or a gatehouse, creates a critical vulnerability. The true strength of a civilization lay not in the impermeability of its barriers, but in the adaptability of its people. This sobering truth forces us to look past the age of sieges and ask a final, poignant question. What becomes of these monumental testaments to human conflict when the world moves on and the battles fade into memory? The principles of ancient defense have not vanished, they have simply shapeshifted. The same strategic logic that dictated the placement of a medieval bastion now governs the design of a modern airport security queue. This is the enduring legacy of the wall, a blueprint for security that transcends time and material. The layered defense of Constantinople, with its moat, outer wall, and inner wall, finds a direct parallel in the multiple stages of airport screening. You first pass through an initial checkpoint, then your luggage is scanned, and finally, you are observed by surveillance personnel, a digital parabolos ensuring no threat passes from one zone to the next unseen. The concept of the choke point, that narrow, twisting approach to a castle gate, is now a fundamental principle in everything from stadium entryways to digital firewalls. These systems do not try to protect every inch of a perimeter equally. They create a few tightly controlled access points, forcing any potential threat into a confined space where it can be managed and neutralized. Even the psychological deterrent of a monumental wall is alive and well. The imposing fences around power plants or military installations are not just physical barriers. They are a clear, unspoken statement of boundary and consequence, designed to intimidate and discourage long before a physical test occurs. So how does the geometry of death manifest today? Look at any secure building's entrance. The path is rarely a straight line. You are funneled into a single-file queue, often behind crash-proof bollards, your movement controlled, and your exposure to cameras and security personnel maximized from multiple angles. It is a non-lethal, modern application of enfilading fire, using observation and control to achieve what once required arrows and boiling oil. The ancient language of walls, spoken for millennia in stone and earth, is now fluently expressed in concrete, steel, and lines of digital code. These old structures are not crumbling relics, they are active, living textbooks on the universal principles of protection. To understand them, you must learn to read the world like an architectural detective, seeing the ghost of the bastion in the security checkpoint and hearing the echo of the portcullis in the click of a firewall. Your next walk through an old city can become a masterclass in military history. To read a wall, you must first learn its alphabet, a vocabulary written in stone and strategic placement. Start with the ground beneath your feet. Is the settlement perched on a hill, its back to a river, or built across a narrow pass? This is not a coincidence. It is the first and most important defensive decision ever made. Then approach the wall itself and run your hand over its skin. The texture tells a story. Rough, irregular stonework might speak of haste or limited resources, while smooth, tightly fitted ashlar blocks whisper of immense wealth and meticulous planning. Look for the scars. A patch of newer, differently colored stone is not a blemish. It is a historical record, a silent testament to where a battering ram finally broke through or a cannonball found its mark, a wound that was later healed. Now step back and observe the pattern of the towers. Are they round, a design perfected against the trebuchet, or are they angular bastions, sharp and geometric, a clear response to the age of cannon fire? This shift in shape is a visible timeline, a direct readout of the technological arms race between the builder and the besieger. The gate is the most complex sentence in this architectural language. Do not just look at the door, look at the entire approach. Is the path to the gate a long, straight road, or does it twist and turn, forcing a right-handed approach to expose unshielded soldiers? Peer up into the dark recess of the gatehouse ceiling. Can you see narrow slots, the murder holes, through which death was poured down on trapped invaders? Look for the vertical grooves in the stonework on either side of the entrance, the telltale sign of a heavy portcullis that could slam shut in an instant. Finally, if you can, climb to the parapets, stand where the archers stood and trace the sight lines. Look down along the base of the wall. From this vantage point, the genius of the design snaps into focus. You will see how every tower protects its neighbor, how there is not a single inch of ground that is not commanded by a clear line of fire. This is the geometry of death made real, a killing field calculated not on parchment but in stone. By asking these simple questions, you are no longer just a tourist. You are an architectural detective, fluent in a lost language. Every wall has a story of fear, ingenuity, and the desperate will to survive. It is a story waiting for anyone who learns how to look. A castle like Crac des Chevaliers was not built to control a border, but to dominate a single critical point. Its concentric rings of walls are a fortress turned inward upon itself, a series of ever-tightening, impenetrable shells. Every element is designed to maximize defensive power within a confined space, creating a final redoubt that could be held by a relatively small garrison against overwhelming numbers. This is the micro-scale philosophy of defense, a clenched fist of stone. Now place that image beside the Great Wall of China. Its purpose was not to be an unbreachable barrier across thousands of miles, an impossible task. Instead, it functioned as a macro-scale control system, a sprawling net cast over a continent to manage the movement of nomadic armies, rob them of surprise, and channel them into predetermined killing zones. One design concentrates force into a singular, unyielding knot. The other disperses its presence across a vast frontier, using communication and terrain as its primary weapons. The differences only grow more fascinating when we look east to the castles of Japan. Here, defense reached for the sky. The massive, sloping stone bases, designed to be virtually impossible to scale, supported complex, multi-storied wooden keeps. These towering structures were not just strongholds, they were command centers and symbols of power, emphasizing vertical defense. The entire complex was a labyrinth of baileys, or enclosed courtyards, forcing an attacker to fight through a sequence of fortified gates and open spaces, each one higher than the last, under constant fire from above. So what do these distinct blueprints tell us? They are frozen reflections of the threats their builders faced. The Great Wall responded to the fluid, fast-moving raids of steppe nomads, requiring a system of early warning and area denial. The European castle was a product of a fractured landscape of rival lords and kingdoms, a world where holding a key mountain pass or river crossing was paramount. The Japanese castle, often built on mountainous terrain, used that landscape to create a cascading series of defensive positions, reflecting a highly stratified feudal society. There was no single, perfect way to build for defense, only brilliantly tailored solutions. A society's architecture reveals its deepest fears and its most ingenious answers. This incredible global tapestry of thought, woven from stone and strategy, now faces a silent, patient enemy far more destructive than any army. These silent stone manuscripts are crumbling. The very elements that gave them strength for centuries, wind and rain, are now slowly picking them apart, but nature's patient erosion is only one of the dangers they face. The relentless expansion of modern cities swallows ancient perimeter walls, while the very breath of industry settles as a corrosive film on their surfaces. Even our admiration becomes a threat as the footsteps of millions of tourists wear down staircases and pathways. When a section of a 2,000-year-old wall falls, it is not a random pile of rubble that is created. It is a void, a permanent erasure of a page from a book that can never be rewritten. Each lost stone was a unique data point in the story of human conflict, a physical testament to a specific solution to an age-old problem. The repair of these structures is a delicate art, a race against time that demands more than just modern cement. It requires specialized knowledge of ancient mortars, of traditional stone cutting, and a deep understanding of the original builder's intent. Organizations like UNESCO designate these sites as World Heritage locations, not as museums but as living classrooms. Why pour such immense resources into saving old piles of rock? Because they are our most tangible connection to the minds of those who came before us. You can read about a siege in a book, but to stand in the shadow of the wall that endured it, to run your hand over the same stones that defied an army, is to understand history in your bones. These fortifications are open-air libraries of human ingenuity, and every collapse is a lost chapter in the story of ourselves. As we work to preserve these monumental achievements, we are also tasked with holding their complex legacy. They stand as testaments to both our brilliance and our perpetual fear, to the communities we built and the conflicts we could not avoid. Saving them is not an act of glorifying war, but of honoring the profound and enduring human will to survive, to create, and to leave a mark that says we were here. The very stones that promised safety could also enforce a brutal separation. For every story of a community sheltered behind a wall, there is a counter-story of a people divided by one. The same architectural ingenuity that created the protective curtain wall was easily repurposed to build ghettos, sealing off entire populations deemed undesirable. The same gatehouse that was a triumph of defensive engineering could, with a simple change of intent, become a checkpoint for oppression, controlling who could enter or, more chillingly, who could leave. A wall built to keep a threat out could, in a moment, become a cage to keep people in. This is the profound and unsettling duality of the wall, an object that embodies our highest aspirations for security and our deepest fears of the other. We see this dark legacy etched into history. Consider the walls of medieval European cities that separated the nobility in their fortified keeps from the commoners in the towns below. Or the Berlin Wall, a stark concrete scar that divided a city, a nation, and the world, not to protect from an external army, but to imprison its own citizens. The principles were identical to a fortress: watchtowers, clear lines of sight, and impassable barriers, but the purpose was inverted. It was defense turned inward, a perversion of the communal promise. So, does the instinct to build a wall speak to a noble desire for safety, or a fearful retreat from the unknown? The answer is that it speaks to both. These structures are a powerful mirror, reflecting our incredible capacity for collective defense and our tragic tendency toward suspicion and isolation. They represent the fundamental human tension between the need for a safe home and the temptation to define that home by who is not allowed inside. To truly read the language of walls is to understand this complex, often painful, vocabulary of inclusion and exclusion. This sobering reflection on their dual nature brings us to the final, enduring mystery these structures hold, a question not about their past, but about their silent, persistent presence in our future. These stone sentinels pose a permanent question to our modern world. How do we balance our deep, instinctual need for safety with the equally human yearning for openness and connection? Every ancient wall, from the smallest village boundary to the grandest imperial fortification, was a physical answer to this dilemma, a frozen moment of a society deciding where to draw the line. The relentless human drive to build barriers, a tradition stretching from prehistoric palisades to contemporary border fences, reveals a persistent tension in our very nature. We are a species that builds communities for mutual support, yet we so often define those communities by who we keep out. The architectural principles of the Bastion and the Gatehouse find their echo in our social structures today. We create gated communities, digital firewalls, and complex immigration policies, all modern iterations of the same ancient blueprint, attempting to control access and manage perceived threats. The fundamental challenge remains unchanged. Does true, lasting security come from building thicker, higher barriers, or from investing in the sturdy, flexible bridges of diplomacy, trade, and cultural exchange? A wall offers the illusion of a simple, definitive solution, a clear line between safety and danger. But history whispers that the strongest societies were never the most isolated, but the most resilient and adaptable. The great trading cities that thrived for centuries were often the ones with gates that opened as frequently as they closed, facilitating the flow of goods and ideas that became the lifeblood of their power. The future of the wall in our interconnected world is uncertain. While physical barriers continue to rise in some places, their limitations are more apparent than ever. In an age of digital networks and global challenges that respect no borders, from pandemics to climate change, the concept of a purely defensive perimeter feels increasingly obsolete. The ultimate lesson these ancient structures teach us may be the most difficult one to learn. While physical walls can be torn down by force or made irrelevant by time, the psychological walls we build, the assumptions and fears that divide us, are often the most formidable and enduring. They challenge us to seek a security that is not rooted in fear and isolation, but one built on the sturdy foundation of understanding, cooperation, and a shared sense of human destiny. The silent language of the stones ultimately asks us to look inward, to examine the barriers we carry within ourselves, and to find the courage to begin dismantling them. Our journey to decipher the lost language of city walls reaches its end, not with a final answer, but with a profound realization. These structures were never just piles of stone. They were masterpieces of integrated design where psychology, mathematics, and geography fused into a single, formidable intelligence. We have moved from the awe-inspiring scale meant to crush an enemy's spirit to the cold, calculated geometry of the star fort, a killing field rendered in perfect angles. We have seen how these walls were not passive shields, but active participants in their own defense, using clever lies, the very lay of the land, and the silent war beneath the earth as their weapons. The core principles they embody are timeless. The layered defense of Constantinople, the controlled access of a deadly gatehouse, the psychological deterrence of a monumental presence, these are not just historical curiosities. They are the fundamental blueprints for security, as relevant to a modern network firewall or a security checkpoint as they were to a medieval castle. These walls are more than decaying relics. They are enduring lessons carved in stone, teaching us about human problem solving under extreme pressure, about the resilience of communities, and about the eternal, complex dance between our need for safety and our desire for freedom. So the next time you stand before an ancient wall, do not just see an old monument. Let the silent stones speak. Listen for the echoes of the sentry's call, the creak of the portcullis, the distant thunder of the siege. Each one has a story of fear, ingenuity, and the desperate will to survive. We would love to hear which historic walls have spoken to you. Share a photo or a memory in the comments below of a fortress or a city wall that has captured your imagination. And if you want to join more journeys into the hidden narratives of our world, be sure to subscribe. The blueprint of the past is always there, etched into the landscape, waiting for a curious mind to finally read it.